We are going to wait a few more minutes while attendees arrive. If you have not done so already, please introduce yourself in the chat section with your name, organization, or company, and what region you are in. Thank you. Good morning and welcome. My name is Kim Woodworth. I'm the Operations Director for the Economic Development Council of Colorado. Just a few housekeeping items before we start. You've all entered into this webinar on mute for recording quality purposes. We encourage you all to ask questions from our presenters today. You can type them into the chat section at the bottom of your screen. Today's event is to educate, bring new ideas, and bring new ideas and practices forward. If you have any questions after this webinar, please send them to me at kim.woodworth@edcconline.org. For those of you who are new to us, EDCC is a statewide industry association that supports economic development efforts across Colorado. We connect our communities, our members, and our partners to high-quality educational opportunities and trusted resources, and advocate for sound policies and programs that support a vibrant economy and enhance quality of life for all of Colorado. EDCC members come from a variety of settings. We are rural and urban, public and private sector, for-profit and not-for-profit, and include individual communities, counties and regional organizations, local and state government, chambers of commerce, universities, and private industry. EDCC is building a virtual arsenal of information to keep our professionals updated on the latest trends, data, and case studies. You can access all of this information at any time by visiting edcconline.org/past events. We'll drop the link into the chat section here soon. EDCC is taking a hybrid approach to our programming in 2021. We are coordinating 3 virtual series, 3 Knowledge Network series, and we are committed to coming together again in Steamboat for our annual Drive Lead Succeed Conference, October 20th through the 22nd. Our sponsorship drive kicked off last month after finalizing this year's events and programming. There is great value in supporting our efforts in tackling our most perplexing issues and bringing the information and resources to our professionals that is needed to spur innovative solutions at the local level. As a sponsor, you'll be recognized through our various platforms, video recordings, website, thought position papers, in-person meetings, and more. We'll drop a link into the chat section here shortly if you're interested in learning more about becoming more involved with EDCC. One last item to mention, June 14th through the 17th, EDCC is hosting our Basic Economic Development course. The BEDC course provides a substantial introduction to the theory and fundamentals of comprehensive economic development. The formal instruction emphasizes beneficial development that can result from the constructive actions of local leaders. Now, without further ado, let's move on to today's programming. From trends that accelerated during the pandemic to the new ways of doing business, it leaves the question as to where are the retail and hospitality industries going. Municipalities are grappling with reduction in sales tax to crippling zoning regulations that are chasing potential retailers away. Site selection trends and pandemic-related needs are demanding infrastructure that isn't available or permissible by zoning restrictions, and employment opportunities are declining as industry leaders predict a reduction in hiring caused by automation and minimum wage increases. Online presence has never been more critical to retailer success as they have to manage channels to connect to larger audiences, causing capacity and financial woes. In the same spirit as EDCC's 2020 virtual series began, we are tackling the difficult questions, analysis and trends of the industry and the impact on how communities respond to supporting critical services, education, and amenities that are already at a financial disadvantage. EDCC's events and programming and communication committees all came together over the past few months and developed a one-of-a-kind virtual event designed to get to the heart of these issues. Researched the data to back up their theories developed in the exploration, which resulted in a thought leader position report that our professionals will be able to use to help guide conversations and actions at the local level. We are excited to share this report with our members, and for those of you who aren't members, we hope by the end of today's event that you'll think about becoming more involved. In the near term, though, we will have this available for a nominal fee. I'd like to introduce to you today's moderator, Julie Jacoby. Julie is the retail administrator for the City of Thornton and oversees the retail business attraction for the city. Julie has an extensive managerial and marketing career spanning a variety of industries, including retail, development, broadcasting, hospitality, and education. Julie is a true treasure to EDCC, as she is an active participant and co-chair of our events and programming committee, which is no easy feat. Let's all give Julie a warm Zoom welcome. Julie, I will let you take it away from here.
I've been in retail essentially my whole life. I grew up in a family-run business and into shopping center development, and now in the public sector, serving the retail industry in Thornton. In that time, the one constant has been in the retail industry. I've seen quite a bit of it, and it's evolved quite a bit in those years. I won't say how many years because that gives too much away on my age. But in that time, I've witnessed that, again, that constant evolution, but the pandemic itself really fast forwarded our industry about 10 years. And trends that we were seeing coming down the pipeline, which were nice to have, are now a must have in the site selection process. And I feel it's important for us to understand where the industry is heading and what changes are here to stay, and adapt our efforts and to not only businesses, but also help them thrive in our communities. So what I'd like to now is actually introduce our wonderful panel today, and they will share with us what they are seeing happen to the industry, which includes nationally and locally, along with the impacts and challenges this brings to both our communities and the workforce. So what I'm going to try to do now, since we've kind of lost Kim, is I'm going to attempt to share my screen. And here's that I do this correctly. I wasn't prepared for this part of it, so forgive me. Here we go. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes, we can. I can.
Yes.
Wonderful. Okay. So what I want to do first is actually introduce Jason Schmidt. Jason is going to kick us off today. He is the managing director in the Denver office of JLL Capital Markets, the Americas, and he serves as the current president of our Colorado chapter of the International Council of Shopping Centers. Jason has more than 20 years of experience in commercial real estate industry and focuses on both the retail and office investment advisory transactions in both Denver and the Rocky Mountain region. So Jason, I'm going to kind of turn this over to you. And I know nationally the retail apocalypse, as everybody likes to call it, was predicted like 20 years ago. But what can you tell us about either the reality or the myth of that and how the industry is doing today?
Yes, I'll jump right in there, but can somebody just say, yes, you can hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Excellent, great, yeah. And I do think it's a myth. It's obviously kind of crazy times for us. And if you look at the numbers, you look at 2019, we had 9,200 closures across, tenant closures across the country. Last year was a record of 12,200 stores closing throughout the country. And you couldn't really paint a tougher picture for retail. Obviously, stores were closing around the country and so forth. But what we've really found is, and what you mentioned is, if you go back in time, we've been preparing for this since the late 90s. In fact, in 1998, the cover of Time magazine said, "Kiss your mall goodbye." And if you look at the backdrop, both nationally and locally, there's just been a very controlled environment throughout that whole time. To see what the impacts of the pandemic were, you're actually looking towards the end of last year, the statistics we only had about a percentage point drop in rent. And we're still under 5% vacancy on a national and local basis. So you think about how dramatic this seemed to be, but in reality, we really haven't seen as a global scale, a major impact. And that really is a product of the timeline and how far we've looked into this. We talked about that 1998 timeframe. If you start talking about the real impacts from the internet, that was 2010 when we first saw the Blockbuster video. We go there every Friday afternoon and you rent the Never-Ending Story, but that story did end, and that was all the way into 2010. And then we obviously a number of closures after that. But even in 2019, where we had that 9,000 closures across the country, we had a positive absorption of 8.5 million square feet nationally. And Denver's a great example. So just to use Denver as an example, historically, we've done 3.5 million square feet of new construction on an annual basis. And really, we've been under 1 million for several years now. If you look at the last decade, we've had 5.4% cumulative growth in the last decade of new construction in our marketplace. And so Denver is a good example of that backdrop and how we're seeing the recovery here. Now, we of course did see some impacts, and there's some lasting impacts. We talk about how the things that were pre-pandemic are accelerating. You can go to the next slide here. This is what I was just talking about, and this is the time frame. If you go back down to 2010, that's when you go back to the previous slide. That's the time frame. You can see that we're at a high water mark, even going into 2020, a high water mark for occupancy, a high water mark for lease rates, given all this retail apocalypse. So you can move forward now. So as we talked about how pre-pandemic, we have these trends that are happening, and those trends were accelerated through that. And really, I see this as a very positive moving forward for retail, because now we know what the new landscape looks like. We now accelerated it, and they talk about the e-commerce gains of last year were 35 to 40%, but they're looking into next year in 2021, this year, of those just being 2 or 3%. So you've had this very steep curve. We now know what the rules of the game are, and we're doing on this backdrop of a very controlled environment, high watermark of occupancy and lease rates going into this, and that's where we get a start and move forward. This is a show of the transaction volume, and the transaction volume has dipped in 2020 and will be down in 2021 because it's a product of the uncertainty. No one wanted to trade assets at this time. They were trying to find data points and so forth. And what that means is you've got an inordinate amount of equity wanting to be placed and can be placed in retail once we get the data back, which we're starting now to see, certainly for retailers that performed well throughout the pandemic. So you have very little new construction, a lot of equity, and then you have the trends. One trend that we will continue to see that was post-pandemic, pre-pandemic, that'll go into post-pandemic, is the popularity of the state of Colorado. So on top of that, you have all this equity that wants to be in. I can tell you, it's always sad to hear how long I've been in the business, makes me feel old. But in my 20 years, I've never taken more phone calls from companies wanting to come into the Colorado market. And that's true throughout Colorado, not just Denver. The mountain communities have seen a real lift in popularity through the pandemic. I think that continues. I just took a property out in Colorado Springs. I had 6 offers on the deal. 5 of the offers were from companies that have never been in the state of Colorado, let alone Denver for 4. So that's what I really think. I do think it's a myth, and that's we're going to see those trends. I think one lasting trend we will see is in and around the mall locations. Those will be difficult throughout our communities, and unless you're Cherry Creek, Park Meadows, maybe even Aurora, for certain reasons, we're seeing challenges on other malls. We will close on Foothills Mall here in the next few weeks. That is selling at a discount. We've just sold the vacant Nordstrom rack at Flatirons. We've got the Sears at Larkridge on the market right now. So one major lasting impact certainly will be the mall locations, but everything else that, especially in our communities, I think will continue to be strong and recover very quickly.
Okay, so I just wanted to make sure you're actually done, Jason. So that last slide, you're good? Okay. All right, thank you so much. So up next is Aaron Farmer. Aaron serves as the president of the Retail Coach, and Aaron's extensive knowledge of retail comes from working on projects for many of America's leading retailers and restaurants, including FedEx, Kinko's, Sally Beauty, Adidas, Concentra, and the National American Association of Subway Franchises. So Aaron brings knowledge of the industry through the most research on retail and marketing trends. Aaron, I know you've been watching closely the consumer trends that changed very quickly due to the pandemic. And we'd love for you to share with us a little of what you've seen, what the consumer trends are that are impacting the site selection and business models for our retail industry moving forward, and which ones are going to stick around post-COVID.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thanks for the intro there, Julie. Excited to be here today. Just want to really piggyback on what Jason mentioned. The retail apocalypse, I think that's a myth. I will tell you, the last 3 to 4 months, we're busier than we've ever been. And when I say busier, that means retailers and restaurants that maybe were on hold, or brokers that were on hold trying to get deals done. We're fast and furious. I'm getting calls saying, hey, we're ready to make it. We're ready to get that deal. I'm hearing a lot of brokers, a lot of retailers in the industry tell us they're in what they call post-COVID mode. So obviously we're still dealing with COVID, but they've been on, most of these retailers, most of these restaurants have been on hold for the last year, and they're ready to start making deals again. They have to make up for lost time. They have to open stores to be successful, and those sort of things. So I think it is a myth. And the first slide I want to show you here real quick just kind of shows, this is looking at currently on the right side of the screen, I think May 24th was the last day I was able to run, but May 24th, going back 2 years. And what we saw is leading up to, this is industry trends. This is how well we're doing in the retail industry. This is consumers that are shopping, that are out there. Basically we were doing well until the first week of March of 2020. And that's when, everything started to shut down. The quarantines happened. We saw a huge drop. So retail foot traffic at these stores, and many, at the biggest height of it, kind of that late March, early April time, we were down about 50%. And this is across the board in Colorado. Things started to get a little bit better as we got into kind of June, July of 2020, kind of leveled out. As we got through October, we saw, some big drops again around the November, kind of December timeframe. And then back in March of this year, we actually saw some positives. We saw over the last few years, we saw people getting out again, spending money, going shopping, those sort of things. And we're still down a little bit, even this month compared to 2 years ago, but we're only down less than 10% from a retail shopping standpoint. And again, this is foot traffic. These are people shopping, going out to eat again. So the numbers here look good. We're starting to see people get out again, spend money, and shop. So excited to see that here. On the next slide here, we're going to look at a couple of the categories that did incredibly well, and some that did not so well during the pandemic. And I want to point out a couple to you here real quick on this graph. But again, June of 2020 is on the far left of the graph, and then current time is on the far right here. The ones that performed incredibly well was home improvement stores. Home improvement is the green line here at the top. And, starting since the beginning of the pandemic, home improvement stores have done just incredibly well. So whether that's Ace Hardware, whether that's some of your local hardware stores, Home Depot, Lowe's, they did incredibly well, and they continue to perform better than other industries. And I think a lot of that has to do with people working from home. I think that has to do with doing, home improvement projects. I think it has to do with, the housing market booming right now. People buying lumber prices going up, those sort of things. And then again, do it yourself, kind of spring cleaning, spring planning, those sort of things. So home improvement stores have done incredibly well. The superstores did well as well. This is the orange line here. They did well. They were up most of the time, and even though we see a little bit of drop here, most of your superstores are showing increases in retail sales during the pandemic. A big part of that is people were maybe not going to the superstores as much, but they were buying larger. They were filling their baskets more than they would typically. They were spending more money each time they would go. But some of the categories that struggled, dining. So you see dining here, which is the dark blue. Many restaurants were not able to be open, or if they were, it was only they were only able to be open because of with drive-through or pickup and those sort of things. So did not do well there. And then the same thing with clothing, apparel. That's the light blue. We're seeing apparel make a comeback though. which is great to see. So those are just some of the trends that we're seeing in the market. And again, the retail industry is coming back strong. It might be the strongest we've seen it in years over the next 6 months to a year. So excited to see that. On the next slide here, we take a look at just some of the migration trends and what we're seeing here. And I just want to hit on these very quickly. We're seeing people from very rural areas and also those densely populated kind of city areas. They're moving more to the suburbs. We're seeing them move out, not having to go into the city as much if they're working from home. We're seeing those migration patterns happen. We're also seeing those retail centers in the suburban areas continue to do well. So most of the suburban areas around Denver did well from a retail sales standpoint, even during the pandemic, and now are doing incredibly well. The ones that struggled the most were those communities, those retail areas that relied heavily on destination and tourism consumers. So, the downtown Denver's, the core Denver metro area struggled from a retail sales standpoint. And even some of those, the resort communities, ski communities, we saw some major drops in retail sales in most of those because they were relying on those destination consumers, those tourists. But based on those trends, we expect retailers and developers to continue to target the more suburban areas and also those new emerging areas. I look at some of the areas kind of outside of Denver. Bennett, Colorado Bennett might be a good example to look at, that we're seeing a big housing boom take place out there. A lot of the retailers that we're talking to right now are targeting those markets where they're seeing heavy household growth, but the ones that people are moving to. But we do expect these trends to continue, as many people aren't having to drive into work on a daily basis. They're staying home. They're moving out of the metro areas into not just suburban, but even the more rural areas. I think that trend is going to continue over time here. A few other trends on the next slide we'll look at here in the retail industry. COVID, so pre-COVID, it was all focused on experience, creating that experience for the consumer in the retail stores. We expect that to continue, but post-COVID, some of the things we expect to see more of is a continued focus on avoiding customers, avoiding services, avoiding interactions. We expect that to continue. Not as much as it has during COVID, but we do expect that to continue. So contactless checkouts, the scan and go, the smartphone apps, the buy online, pick up in store, or the buy online, return in store, that's going to continue. Much more of a focus on drive-through lanes, and then also walk up and take out is going to be something we continue to see going forward here as well. On the next slide, just a few other things to talk about. Big box stores. I'm not going to spend much time on this, but the big box stores, most of them were considered essential. Most of them are the one-stop shops, whether that's Costco, Walmart, some of these Target, some of these others. Consumers flock to those and continue to flock to them because they could make less trips. They could make less stops at different retailers and restaurants, and they could get everything to happen there. So big box continues to kind of rule the world. We expect that to continue going forward as well. Just a few other slides here, and I'll wrap up my portion here. But on the next slide, just some of those new trends that we're seeing. I mentioned more of a convenience factor, more of a focus on curbside pickup, more of a focus on drive-through. These are just some of the new prototypes that we're seeing restaurants roll out. Sonic is rolling out more of a focus on drive-through. Some of the Sonics already have drive-through, but more of a focus on drive-through, maybe adding 2 lanes. Burger King is adding 6 lanes to their newest locations, where they have curbside pickups. They have, the restaurant applications like Uber Eats, and some of these others will have their own lane. You'll more focus on patios, more focus on drive-throughs, and also walk-up windows at some of these restaurants. But something to pay attention to here is these restaurants with these new concepts aren't requiring as much land. So they're able to make something work on 0.75 acres versus an acre and a half. So we're continue to expect to see more amped up delivery, changes to building footprints moving forward here. And then I think this is my last slide, Julie, if I'm not mistaken, but Main Street retail is a focus. Many of the smaller and more local Main Street businesses, they took the hardest hit during this time. Many of them weren't prepared. They weren't able to stay open, or weren't able to make it work. So Main Street retailers, to continue to thrive, they have got to embrace an online presence. If you're working with local businesses in your community and they don't have a website or a social media presence, that's a must right now. So there's companies that make that happen, e-commerce platforms that allow for them to sell not just in their community but outside of that. Shopify, Square, Toast have all made it a lot easier from that standpoint. Your local businesses need to be offering curbside delivery and pickup as well. If they want to compete with the national retailers, the national restaurants, that's a must. And then also a stronger focus put on marketing to their consumers, and also a focus on customer service. What's going to separate them from the larger retailers and restaurants? That's a key going forward here. Many communities, and I just saw this, but a couple of things in the chat here. Some of you did not see your Main Street businesses suffer. If you didn't, that's awesome. We are seeing a focus, people wanting to get outside more, wanting to focus on patios, wanting to focus on downtowns and Main Street retailers and restaurants. Some of you might have not have seen that downturn, but still, even if you didn't see that downturn, work with your retailers, with your restaurants to focus on those trends. And then lastly, here's just a list of some of the retailers and restaurants that are going to be expanding this year and next. We'll get a copy of this presentation out to everyone so you can see that.
Thank you so much, Aaron. There was one additional question. Somebody asked how you measured your foot traffic.
Yeah, so we look at cell phone data. So anybody that has a cell phone, it's really scary to think about, but you're being tracked. So we're tracking cell phone data on a daily basis. So that's how we're actually tracking foot traffic into these specific retailers, restaurants, and shopping centers.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
This is an interesting segue into bringing Ryan into the conversation now. So Ryan Stachelski, he's one of our own EDCC and serves as the Director of the Community and Economic Development for the City of Arvada. And under his direction, the department oversees and aligns the building, planning, development, review, and economic development services of the city in order to better align services with the community's vision. Has over 14 years of economic development experience, spending most of his tenure with the city of Arvada. And Ryan, coming off of the conversation with Aaron, I think a really important question is what role our communities can play in terms, as we see these trends evolving, as we see the repositioning of some of the retail occurring, how do we prepare our cities for what's coming, and what do we need to be watching for?
Great, thank you so much. And I certainly agree with folks that the retail industry is not dead and is thriving, but it's thriving in new ways. And I think cities need to be prepared for that. I remember conversations 6, 7, 8 years ago when we were talking about online sales and nervous about the fact that, as everybody knows, that retail sales tax is one of the primary sources of revenue for cities. And so as a result of that, retail is near and dear to our hearts, and making sure that it's successful is near and dear to our hearts. We were looking at online sales and how cities were going to be impacted that several years ago. Then obviously the Wayfair decision came forward, and that made a big difference in communities and how that interacted. And then even more recently, there was some legislation that the state did that required even more remittance of sales tax through online retailers like Amazon that provided more retail sales tax coming in through the city. So it has been interesting that we are having multiple ways to get retail sales tax coming into our city. But certainly, while that's been a net positive for a lot of cities in that way, we need to make sure that our bricks and mortar retailers can continue to be successful. So one of the ways that the city of Arvada has approached that is really looking at our land development code and making sure that our land development code is going to meet the design and development needs of retail moving forward. So even though we're all saying that retail is not dead and it's going to be moving forward, the way that we experience retail is going to be changing. And I think that that is something that community leaders need to be aware of, so that when big box stores or fast food chains or mom and pop retailers or whomever come in, that their code is available so that it offers a lot of flexibility. So a couple of the things that the city of Arvada has done is that we've recently just done a complete rewrite of our land development code. And I'll get into some kind of nerdy planning language here, but one of the things that we've done is we've rezoned our city and moved away from plan unit developments. So doing PDPs and FDPs and those types of things, which are a longer, more administrative process that you have to make very specific decisions at different times along the process and say, this is what I'm doing. We've moved that and gone to straight zone districts. And the beauty of straight zone districts is that straight zone districts, that if you meet the development standards, can be approved administratively and without a lot of public hearings and those types of things. So you're not doing a lot of engineering work and other building work before you know you have approval. If you meet the development standards, you can do all of those types of things, and we're able to be more flexible and nimble within our code. Additionally, we have developed a number of mixed-use districts that doesn't necessarily require us to have a mix of uses. So we're not talking about needing vertical or horizontal mixed-use developments in order to be successful. What it does is it allows for a variety of uses that are in current shopping centers now that can run the gamut everywhere from residential to hospitals to offices and retail in there to create more flexibility of how real estate can be used. What we've also seen is the way that people want to experience those spaces is to have more placemaking aspects, to have almost public amenities being used as anchors in parts of it. You can see even in Julie's neck of the woods, the Simon the Simon Mall that went in there has large aspects of free community placemaking spaces that you can go and make a day out of it with your family and those types of things, and then go shopping. And it's such an amenity that people are able to use. We're looking at integrating parks, open space, trails connectivity, and those types of amenities so that you are not just going and picking something up at a shopping center, but you're going and you're able to spend time, you're able to diversify how you're spending your time there. And we find that to be really important. Other things that getting into the flexibility of uses, the fact that retailers may or may not need 50,000 square feet for the size of their store. So they're going to condense, and they may want to be co-located with other types of uses that allow them to kind of broaden out how that experience is going to be. We're also looking at heights and vertical uses. So, a typical shopping center these days are going to typically be one story. Maybe they're 2 stories, but more often than not, if it's commercial alone, it's going to be 1 story. Well, to get your biggest bang for your buck, you want as much square footage that you can lease out as you can. So being able to go up in heights and offer things like offices above retail, being able to wrap parking structures and those types of things within your zoning as a use by right, all allows that developer to have a lot more flexibility coming into a property and understanding how am I going to be able to integrate retail into an experience. Oh, I'm sorry, 2 voicemail. Integrate those into it. So we're looking at creating our own kind of unique downtowns and shopping center areas that are more than just retail. They are a mix of commercial uses and potentially residential uses, and integrating that into the placemaking and public spaces that we want as a community. The last thing I will point out in this, and this is a difficult community conversation, but a lot of people and a lot of our local leaders will say, you know, what's really important is that we remain to have retail in our communities because that's where sales tax come from and that funds services. And I often push back on that notion because although this gets me in a little bit of trouble, I will say businesses and retail businesses do not pay sales tax. Customers pay sales tax. Businesses collect sales tax. So when you're looking at successful retail in your communities, you also need to be looking at where are your customers coming from and making sure that you have the customers so that you can attract those retail businesses so they can be successful. So that's in the form of residents, but also visitors and other amenities that bring people into your community. So that is what I wanted to share today, and I'm happy to answer questions later. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Ryan. Up next, we actually have, we want to talk a little bit more about the restaurant perspective. And we're seeing some things coming up in the chat talking about restaurant workers and things like that. So it's perfect timing because with us today, we have Dave Woodruff. It's a tongue twister. Dave is the general manager of the El Moro Spirits and Tavern in downtown Durango and serves as the current president of the Durango chapter of the Colorado Restaurant Association. The Colorado Restaurant Association is the leading trade organization for the state's dynamic food service industry. And in addition to being a master of organization, Dave is Cicerone certified. Hopefully I said that right. But basically what it means is he makes more than a few incredible cocktails is the summary of that certification. So it's kind of too bad we're on Zoom and can't all enjoy one of these considering the way we all started this morning. So based on that, Dave, what can you tell us about how the restaurant industry is doing?
It's a really loaded question.
It's a broad one.
Everybody, Dave Woodruff. So, you know, I come from the lens of a boots on the ground perspective. You know, having been an operator in Durango for the last 8 years of the restaurant, and then being the current chapter president for the last 6 years, it's given me a really good working understanding of what different forces are at play in Durango, and we have a pretty unique community in that we're relatively rural. We're a smaller town, smaller than 17,000 people, and but we have a really robust tourism demographic. And what we've seen is, using the dirty P word, we've all had to pivot the last 14, 15 months throughout the entirety of the pandemic. And I think as we come out of the pandemic, at least in Durango, and I think we're all also probably seeing the same thing in other mountain communities, is that I really forecast and see that there's going to be another golden age of restaurants. People are seeking that social fulfillment, and they need to find that connectivity with others. One of the other things that I've noticed is that, talking to a manager the other day, he really inspired me in terms of what people are looking for right now is finding the moment, sharing food and drink, and then sharing connectivity with others, and finding that moment right now is what people are really trying to engage in and try to find. So all of that, kind of overarching 30,000 foot view of what people, in terms of what we're seeing for consumer trends. But what does that mean for restaurants and communities in general? And what I've noticed, especially working with our Business Improvement District, our Chamber of Commerce, our city and county government, and then the Economic Development Alliance down here in La Plata County, is that we're really looking at public-private partnerships kind of being that upward trend of how do we all collectively work together towards a common economic vitality. For the first time in probably 15 years, Durango's looking at its downtown strategic plan. What does that look like for retail? What does that look like for restaurants? What does it look like from a city perspective? And so what we're trying to do is figure out, what are these big ideas that we've been talking about for so long? How do we start making that a reality? And so we're really trying to figure out what that could look like. And is it realistic? And so it's good that we're really trying to look at what's realistic. Sorry, I've got kids in the background. Everybody decided to not have school today, so I've got 3 kids I'm trying to manage at the same time. So bear with me here. And looking at the chat, we can talk about the elephant in the room. Obviously, the labor shortage is the big one right now. We are not immune to that in Durango as much as anywhere else. And I don't think it's any one thing in terms of why people are not coming back to work, especially in restaurants. I can't speak for other sectors, but the big one that I think what I've seen personally is that people are not coming back to work because basically what happened during the pandemic is that the mask and the pandemic became a political issue and not necessarily a public health issue. And so my employees literally got spit on, they got physically accosted, they got, yelled and cursed at. So people are like, there's no amount of money that's worth it to me. And with other sectors being, having a strong job market means other sectors are available to work. So if there's a time to change career path, it's now. And so I've seen a lot of people leave the restaurant industry, forever, because there's other sectors that are hiring that may be towards their degree or whatnot. So I think that's probably a big one that I've seen, especially down here, and especially in a tourism-driven economy, you have people from all over the world coming to Durango, and so what we expect out of people and in our community is not necessarily something that's reflected in other communities. So that's been a challenge that we've been trying to address. But as we come out of the pandemic, it's getting a little bit easier. But also, a little bit of that unemployment money, it plays a factor. I don't think it's going to be a huge factor. It is a decent amount of money, but I don't think it's keeping people from coming back to work. But what we're seeing right now, especially with the labor pool being, especially in Durango, being a town of 17,000 people, the labor pool is a pretty small pool to start with. In Durango and La Plata County, restaurants employ over 3,000 people for a county of 60,000 roughly. So it's a pretty dynamic sector. And as we know, line cooks and front house employees don't grow on trees anymore. And so we really have to figure out a way to incentivize, recruit people to come into work. Right now in Durango, we're seeing anywhere from $250 to $500 as a sign-up bonus to come into work. And then everybody's transitioning to at least $15 an hour to start, and that minimum wage to get people to come in through the door. And right now, I can speak from an operational standpoint, everybody's looking at how do we get that recruitment retention piece ironed out. We're talking from anything from childcare to affordable housing to healthcare. And this isn't just an individual operator conversation. This is a community-wide endeavor. How do we get more affordable housing? These are larger, I think, more engaging topics that we need to look at. To be honest, everything we're talking about right now, whether it be retail or restaurants, it's just a box with a roof on it without the people. So right now we need to figure out how do we get the people back to wanting to come into work. And I think especially from a restaurant standpoint, how do we cultivate and grow some of those employees from within? We've got a homegrown talent initiative here in Durango that we just passed the bond issue to where we're actually building a building at the high school to teach the trades, and culinary program is definitely a part of that. So how do we as communities figure out how do we cultivate and grow some of these people from the ground up in our own community and get them to work and stay where we're at? So that's been a big one. That's been a really big part of our conversations, both as a community and also, from an individual operator standpoint. Another thing that we're seeing right now are supply chain and production disruptions. Just one case in point, you look at the Chinese pork production, it's up 32% over the last 2 years. So it's not only that, but also all of there's a lot of agriculture that gets imported from the U.S. to China. So there's because everybody's kind of been down in terms of being able to operate, especially in a manufacturing standpoint. I think people are seeing that because there's been this huge increase in openings and kind of getting back to business, that we're seeing locally that we're not getting things that we would normally come into account. And so there's a lot of production starts and stops. And so even on the spirits, beer and wine side of things, we're seeing a lot of disruptions in terms of just being able to get product. You talk about the aluminum can shortage. One of our units is a brewery. So trying to source aluminum cans just to be able to produce and manufacture beer has been a challenge. So things like that where we're seeing a lot of things coming out of the pandemic and we're being able to operate again, but to what capacity? I was talking to a restaurant operator just a couple of days ago, and out of the 14 segments of lunch and dinner available during the week, he's only able to open up 5 because of the labor shortage of where it's at. So I think we're trying to figure out if we don't have a robust labor pool, what are we going to do? Is there some sort of automation? Can we augment technology to not necessarily replace the hospitality piece, but how can we help augment it if we don't have the right amount of people in at the same time? So, and to echo Aaron's sentiments, the online presence is critical coming out of the pandemic. If you didn't have a website before the pandemic, you sure as heck better have one now. Whether it be online ordering or just a social media campaign. I think that's one thing that we've seen working with a lot of our downtown businesses and local Durango businesses is trying to get them back on top in terms of what that online presence looks like. So yeah, I'll just leave it at there. Like I said, I come from an operational standpoint, boots on the ground, what I'm seeing and what I'm hearing through being in my different conversations locally. We're out of the woods in terms of being in a pandemic, but we're not out of the woods in terms of being able to operate at full capacity and being able to get back open and where we want to be. So.
Thank you so much, Dave. As you mentioned, the struggle for talent, it's not unique to the restaurant industry. It's across the board in the retail industry as well. And it's causing operational issues across the board. So the next person up is Jamie Fall, which maybe can help address some of this for us. He's the director of Upskill America at the Aspen Institute. It's an employer-led movement to expand opportunity for America's workers. They promote and train advancement practices to help workers progress in their careers and move into better paying jobs. So Jamie has over 25 years of workforce development experience, including a decade at the U.S. Department of Labor's Employment and Training Administration, and served as a Senate-confirmed leader in the Schwarzenegger administration, providing policy and guidance to California's $11 billion workforce system. So Jamie, you have gotten an earful so far this morning, and workforce has come up multiple times. How can we improve the talent for our industry?
Hi, Julie. Thank you. I really appreciate it, and really wonderful to be following Dave because he touched on so many of the issues that I think are important that I want to talk about as well. So again, thanks for letting me be part of this discussion. Again, at Upskill America, we work with typically large employers around their education, training, and development strategies to make sure that frontline and entry-level workers have opportunities to advance in their careers and chances to move up. We just finished the second part of a 3-part study that we're doing where we're looking at how the pandemic and heightened racial inequality has changed how employers are hiring and investing in education and training for their workers. And I realize that most hiring happens locally and that most workers work for small and medium-sized employers and not large global corporations. And by all means, I hope you don't listen to me and think that I'm saying that large employers have this all figured out and they're doing it perfectly. That's still so much to learn, but there are a few things that I want to talk about that they are doing that may not alleviate the talent shortages that folks are experiencing, but may help give them things to think about that might help alleviate some part of that talent challenge that they're seeing. So here's what we learned through our interviews with employers and also a survey that we did, and I put a link to the survey results in the chat already if you'd like to check those out. But many large retailers and food service companies that we talk to are now doing virtual job interviews. The pandemic really forced a lot of companies to move a lot of this process online, and they found really that it's a far more efficient process, and they're not going to go back. Even after the threat of the pandemic is gone, they're going to continue to do things online. At a time, if you think about it, when many people were scared to return to work, didn't want to leave their home, Walmart was able to hire 500,000 workers nationally, and then turned around and hired another 250,000 workers. And in many cases, they actually shortened the hiring process from approximately a week to, in many cases, around 24 hours. Another fast food company reported to us that they really found ways in their communities to automatically schedule people for interviews with their local restaurants. They said it was really a fantastic way for them to improve the diversity of their workforce and to give people an opportunity at a job that might not have had one before. More employers are also offering to pay for certification and college degrees for workers. Companies like Starbucks have been doing this for a long time, and I know you all know their story, but other companies like Chili's, Chipotle, Walmart are now offering free or nearly free tuition or for certifications and college degrees. Waste Management actually even announced in the last couple of weeks that they're going to be paying for tuition for immediate family members of employees as well. Companies have also been providing a lot more training for workers. So if you think about the past recessions, when things got bad, companies, the first thing they did was really cut significantly their education and training budgets. But that wasn't the case. That's not what we've seen over the course of the pandemic. Companies had serious and significant training issues. They had to teach their workers how to understand safety protocols that they haven't had before, health issues as well. And we also heard a lot more about companies providing training for the workers around conflict management. So the things that Dave talked about, they had more tools to really deal with those difficult confrontations that would appear in the workplace between customers, and also in a highly politically charged time, actually between employees as well. Companies also over this time have really looked at their diversity and inclusion strategies and really found them to be lacking. Many companies said they're committed to hiring a more diverse workforce and are offering a more inclusive workplace. We're seeing more employers partner with community organizations that they hadn't partnered with in the past to offer a more diverse pipeline of workers. And companies are also reviewing their hiring processes in an effort to eliminate biases and hidden barriers to employment for people as well. Companies are also looking for a slightly different skill set coming out of the pandemic than they were going into the pandemic. Aaron talked about how companies are going online and having more of an online presence, but companies also reported that they need frontline workers who are more flexible and adaptable. They're looking for strong foundational skills like teamwork and problem solving, which I know have always been the case. But finally, they want workers who are paying even more attention to health and safety requirements. And our survey, again, which I posted the link in the chat, 77% of companies that responded to our survey said digital skills had increased in importance at their restaurant, or at their place of work, I should say. One example I can give you is a restaurant that said they now had people coming to their drive-through, and they were asking people at the drive-through how to download the app so they could order online and not necessarily use the drive-through as frequently. And finally, the last point I want to make, while we're on the topic of skills, we're starting to see more of a move to employers posting positions that speak in terms of the needed skills to perform the job and not education requirements. Employers for way too long have realized or have been using degree requirements and other types of requirements. It's really a screening process. And now they're speaking more in terms of skills in hopes of allowing or encouraging more people to apply for jobs with their companies. So what does all of this mean to you and to your employers that you're working with? I hope as you work with employers, you really try to help them think of ways to be more efficient in their hiring. If they find someone who's good, they need to be able to hire them quickly. If they ask someone to come back in a few days, they really might find that that individual's already been hired and maybe even they're already starting to work someplace. Companies really need to do a better job of articulating the value proposition when they're speaking to job seekers. Why would someone want to come to work for their business? What does the company stand for? And how can they help the job seekers achieve what they need from a job? Companies need to be able to help job seekers see how they fit within the company. And really that begins by listening. If job seekers are looking for flexibility, can the company offer them flexible schedules? If a job seeker is looking for more stability, can they offer them a fixed schedule? If they're home from college for the summer, can they help them earn income to pay for school when they go back in the fall? People want a sense of belonging and purpose in their work. How does working at local companies help individuals fill that need? And then finally, people want to work someplace where they're seen as individuals and they're valued and appreciated. Make sure that companies have an inclusive workplace and everyone feels welcome there, and also help our companies articulate how their jobs are high quality. And if their jobs are not high quality, and we know that some jobs aren't in the retail sector, then individuals really need to be able to work with companies to think through what it means to have a high quality job and how they might want to rethink designing some of their jobs. So the competition for workers is really tight right now. We absolutely understand that, but hopefully there were a few tips in here to help people think about things that they might do to be more competitive for workers right now. So thank you, Julie, back to you.
Curious whether or not you have some recommendations. There were a lot of recommendations there for the businesses and information we can pass along. Is there anything our communities, our cities can do to help with the workforce problem?
Oh, absolutely. So cities have a big role to play with this, right? They have all types of different job training funds that they might be able to tap into to help provide certifications for folks so they could get whether it's food safe or working in the hospitality industry, whatever it might be, some sort of a basic certification that would help them qualify for a job and understand the benefit of working in the industry. The other thing cities can do is really try to help paint a picture of how someone could have a career within an industry. Sometimes individual employers are good about talking about their individual jobs, but they're not so great about helping people see how that individual job fits into the industry and opportunities to advance. So those are just a couple of things that come to mind. And certainly cities can help be a powerful intermediary between the businesses that have jobs and the community organizations that have workers who might be looking for jobs.
Thank you. Dave and Jamie, there was a question in the chat, and if anybody else has questions, I encourage you to put them into the chat section or raise your hand, and you can ask a question of our panelists. But for Dave and Jamie, are you seeing the flight towards rural living helping to solve the labor challenges or adding to it as many people are bringing their own jobs with their move?
I can answer a little bit of that. I think what we're seeing is that people that can afford to move here are moving here. The ones that can work remotely, the ones that can, have their kids educated remotely, that's what I think we're finding. Durango has always been kind of a challenge in terms of having a higher cost of living to be here. But yeah, I don't think we're seeing a bunch of, how do I put this? I don't think we're seeing a big influx of people coming in that are just flying in by the seat of their pants looking for a job. At least not what we used to see previously. Previously, people want to come to Durango because it's, the mountain biking, the rafting, the climbing, everything that you want to do that in terms of outdoor recreation is here in Durango. And so now that we're kind of seeing a higher cost of living because of being more of a desired place to be, I don't think we're seeing that as much as we were previously.
Another question that came through the chat was asking, can you define what a quality job would be? How would you define that?
So from our perspective, it's a job that offers, living wage and benefits in order to for someone to be able to provide for their family, right? Sick leave and vacation and the wages to really have what they need in life to be able to feed their family, provide for an education, and also I would include education and training opportunities within that as well. Of course, that's my area that I'm focused on. But I think if people take a job and go to work for an organization, but they don't have an opportunity to advance and don't see a future in it, they're just not going to stay long. So I would include all of those things in my definition of a quality job.
Thank you. For Jason and Aaron, I saw this morning that in the news that Google is opening their first physical store in New York, which kind of only proves the statement that we've made in the past about the importance of having both an online and a physical presence, that even the online retailers are starting to place some physical stores. And another trend we've seen here is more and more, I think any of us who've been into a King Soopers lately has seen how many workers are there actually doing the shopping to deliver out. And the things like our grocery stores and other storefronts are serving more and more as a warehouse, not just a storefront. Is this a trend you expect to really continue? And is that going to help fill up some of these big box spaces that a lot of us have in our communities?
Yeah, I can speak to that. Certainly the omni-channel phenomenon has increased during the pandemic. If you look at just the holiday shopping from last year, example, like 88% of the people who spent money over Thanksgiving did it with a retail that has a physical building. They may have done it online, and we're seeing actually an increased sale that occurs to those retailers that have the omni-channel. You buy something online, you go in, you might be returning something, and then you increase your purchase. And so it's really solidified the fact that we've got a new set of rules, and it's really solidified the bricks and mortar. The big box question is interesting though, because there's some real challenges with that, and certainly folks on the phone or on the computer here can assist with that. You've got several layers of issues with box retailers. You've got CC&Rs, you've got use restrictions, and then you have zoning requirements. And those stack on top of each other, and it makes it very difficult to create value or to demand much value on a vacant retail box and even redevelop it. So those are challenges that everyone on the phone, I think, can put their hands around and determine. If those boxes didn't have those issues, many of them do have the requirements, the visibility, the access, and other things that would be meaningful to be filled back with those uses.
Yeah, and just to kind of echo what Jason said, we're seeing retailers realize that if they want to be successful, they really have to have a focus on that omni-channel presence. They have to have brick and mortar, they have to have online, they have to offer delivery, everything that goes with that omni-channel presence. But I think, we've seen for so long, and it was accelerated during the pandemic, but we saw just a very steep kind of curve with online sales taking off and e-commerce sales and those sort of things. Well, I think what's going to happen with the e-commerce sales is they're going to level out, and they're still going to be a big part of what we're doing, but we're going to see more of a focus on kind of localized fulfillment centers. We're already seeing that with, the Walmarts of the world, the Macy's having, turned many Macy's stores and other department stores turning, a quarter of their locations into more of fulfillment centers. So I think we're going to continue to really see that. But this just goes to, with Google opening stores, with Amazon opening stores, other traditionally online retailers opening stores, that just goes to show brick and mortar retail is not going away. And it's going to be here. It's just, as some of the other speakers said, that it's just changing, and we've got to keep up with those changing times and how, brick and mortar retail is not what we knew it, 20, 30 years ago. It's a hybrid of all of these things coming together.
Yeah, Julie, one other point there too is you'll see this all in your communities. You've probably heard all this already, but Amazon's opening stores are active in our market, the Denver metro area right now. And when the largest e-commerce force is looking to do brick and mortar stores, I think that really says something.
Yeah, and I think from a retail recruitment standpoint, what I'm telling my client communities is, you want to go after the traditional retailers and restaurants, but look into fulfillment centers too. I think, depending on where your location is in the state and the region, I think there's an opportunity to recruit some of those fulfillment centers. And that brings additional jobs to the community as well, high paying jobs. So that's something to, or better paying jobs, if you will. So that's something to take a look at.
It also goes into the workforce as well, in terms of the type of jobs that are available. They're not all about your standard traditional retail jobs that are front facing. The addition of the warehouse jobs and the fulfillment jobs is increasing quite a bit. And many of, I have heard from our own community, many of the people that left the retail, their retail job simply moved over to Amazon.
Yeah.
During COVID. And so their job became a fulfillment retail job instead of a frontline.
So I do want to say something else kind of related to the workforce, but I know there's been some comments in the chat, and we've talked a little bit about, the retailers, the restaurants not being able to find people to work these jobs. And just want to tell you a quick story. That's not unique to Colorado. We're seeing that really across the country right now. But just some examples of what we're seeing some of the national retailers doing. I'm familiar with a national retailer in the community, restaurant, fast food restaurant, that's paying $3,000 signing bonuses right now, and then driving buses an hour and a half each direction, bringing people in just to work in a McDonald's. So, a lot of these national retailers and restaurants are having to get creative to find employees to make it work.
One of the other questions that came on the chat kind of falls into this a little bit. How do you see the shop local trend and the more millennial mindset influencing this omni-channel presence that we've all been talking about?
So I'll try to take a stab at that. That's kind of a unique question. I think we're going to see more of a focus on kind of shop local campaigns, and they were very popular, 5-10 years ago. I think we're going to see kind of going back to that. I will tell you, millennials, one thing we're seeing is they're less brand loyal. They're less, national retailer brand loyal. So I think that works well or benefits those more mom and pop Main Street type communities. So I think there's a potential to drive more of that millennial factor into your communities. That coupled with, people getting outside a little bit more, getting more to the rural communities, wanting to focus less on the national retailers and restaurants. I think we're going to see, especially driven by the millennials, more of a focus back on the mom and pop, less brand loyal type business, which I think benefits some of the smaller businesses in Main Streets.
A question for the panel. It says one person mentioned, they said many chambers came out against the state public health option this session. Do panelists in this group see this as a positive for Main Street businesses, as they'll be able to compete with bigger businesses on the health insurance offerings, the cost perspective and effort perspective, saving annual time showing for premiums, adjusting rates, etc., if they offer insurance, or give workers freedom to work at small businesses that are unable to afford or offer health insurance. So I guess their question is, do you see it as a positive for the smaller mom and pops in the Main Street, this state public health option? Any thoughts on that? It's kind of a complex question. Maybe Jamie, our luckiest bet on this one.
Well,
No pressure.
no, and thank you, Julie. I was
Yeah,
going to
right.
hide under my desk, but you had already looked my way. No, so I'm not an expert on the situation in Colorado. Sorry to say I don't live there, but workers need to be able to take care of their families and provide for the health of their families, and whatever is going to give them that option, they're going to be looking for that. So I don't know the complexities of the exactly what's going on in Colorado, but people are ultimately going to have to take jobs where they can make sure that their family is provided for. And I think COVID really kind of underscores that we can't be taking our health and the health of our families for granted. So I think that's all I would say, Julie.
Kim, have I missed any questions, or is there anyone with a hand raised that I'm not seeing in the chat? Oh, I just had a question come through, actually. Any ideas for downtown infrastructure management innovations to help small businesses compete with non-downtown developers? Downtown infrastructure management. Maybe this is a Ryan question. Ryan?
Yeah, so I've actually been doing a lot of work specifically in this. There's many different ways you can think about it, but one of the things that are kind of the most visible and things that certainly went on during the pandemic are closing streets. So closing streets has been wildly popular and necessary during the pandemic to be able to still patronize restaurants, but also retail businesses that are doing curbside, but outdoor sales and those types of things. And we've seen that type of thing. But what we've also seen is that people love it, with or without the pandemic. So in Arvada, for example, we've surveyed our community at different points in time over the course of the pandemic, and continually saw that we had 90% of our community members that responded to the poll said that they wanted to keep Main Street closed to traffic so that they could enjoy it in a placemaking, public gathering, kind of enhanced type way. The other thing that added a lot of benefit to that, which is a little bit of a separate conversation, but everybody can probably relate to it, is the governor's executive order related to open container that allowed for certain communities, if they allowed it, to be able to have kind of, it's not exactly the state's definition of an entertainment district, but it allowed bars and restaurants to serve and take their drinks into the public areas, not necessarily into other restaurants. But getting back to the infrastructure piece of that, the challenge of that is that closing the street appears easy if you just put a barricade on each side. However, number one, that's not attractive. And number two, there's a lot of other things that go along with it. There's what's underground when you start putting in bollards and those types of things to make it safe. There's fire lanes, there's lighting that people want to go over the top of areas that all tie into very complex infrastructure conversations. So while you have the idea, which is closing the street, which is a great idea that everybody supports, the implementation of that is far more complex and takes a great deal of planning and understanding for the long term of that. And so it is an infrastructure conversation, and it's one that needs to be done thoughtfully and with your community, because those are long-term decisions that are expensive.
And Tom mentioned on the chat, he's curious how many communities are continuing their closed street policies post-COVID, he knows that Breckenridge ended their experiment despite some positive survey responses. Kim or anyone, do you know where we might, is there any data out there from Colorado communities showing sales and foot traffic before and after those closures, or any tracking that we're aware of, maybe DCI or somebody? Kim, do you know of anyone?
I'm not familiar with any tracking. I mean, that's something that maybe I can take a stab at on a couple of those and get that out to the group in the next couple of weeks so we can see from a foot traffic standpoint what that looked like.
That'd be really good information, I think. Kim?
Dave, do you know if the Colorado Restaurant Association might have any of that type of information?
They might. I'll have to maybe get back to you on that, but they might have some idea, because obviously we were, pushing for that when we were closed for dine-in and outside was the only opportunity for service. So I might be able to get back to you on that, or even, the utilization of public space, maybe not necessarily closing downtown, just you helping, like I said, that public-private partnership. How can the city work with the private business to be able to allow some of those public parks or streets or sidewalks to be able to use for those consumption areas? So I'll have to do some research and maybe get back to you on that.
And I guess I would reach out to Jason as well. Do you know if ICSC might have any of that information from the retailer's standpoint?
I don't know. I mean, I know that there's some Pacer data and so forth, but it'd be interesting to know in different communities. But I have to check into it.
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind digging into it a little bit, I think it'd be nice to maybe a follow-up that we can send out with that information. If we can track it down or find any data, would be great.
Yeah, and actually, if Julie, if you or Kim can give me a couple of communities that went through that process, I've got data on the whole time. So if you'll do that, I'll go and just kind of put a little case study together that we can get out to the groups.
Awesome. That'd be wonderful. Thank you.
Sure.
There was one repost, sorry, Samantha, that I missed it the first time I was looking through the questions. But do you think that the pre-pandemic business structures and prior biases of work motivation being mostly monetary has been shaken up because of the pandemic due to individual realignments of values and priorities? This kind of goes into a jobs question, Jamie.
Yeah, no, I'd be happy to address this. So actually, that's, I think, more of a generational thing than it is anything else. I mean, surveys of millennials and Gen Zs for any number of years now, 5 years at least, have shown that they really want to work at a place where they feel like they belong, where they feel like there is purpose, and certainly where they have opportunities to develop and grow. And if they don't have those things, they're actually as important or more important than the money that they receive. And they just won't stay there if they aren't receiving those things. So again, I think that's really more generational than anything else. And I don't see anything that's going to change that for a number of years.
So also Forbes did a survey that came out this week, and they surveyed consumers, and 44% said if they could work from home, they would accept 10% reduced pay. So that was pretty interesting to see that come out this week. So I think there are some different motivations going forward.
Very interesting. I could understand that. The only challenge is when I'm doing a session like this and I've got 3 dogs and I'm waiting on Amazon to ring my doorbell. That's when working from home is not the greatest of all options in the world.
Well, I saw another study just recently here, another survey that said at least 20, I'm looking at it here, 30% of 30% of workers expect to at least work one day a week at home. So I think what we're going to see is kind of a hybrid for many people where, they're still going to the office, but maybe only 2 to 3 days a week versus 5 days a week. I think that's, from what we're hearing, that's something we're going to continue to see.
That's what's occurring in our own office at the City of Thornton for economic development is we're not going back 5 days a week.
Yeah.
We're doing office coverage, and the rest of the time we are flexing between home and work. So I think there's more and more of that going to occur as we go forward, which is quite nice, honestly. So I think we have one last question. Are there programs that are coming down the pipeline that will utilize some of the rescue plan funding? Do any of our, and Ryan, you might know this a little bit, is Arvada have anything planned for rescue plan funding? Does anybody know of any other programs coming down the pipeline for that?
So what I can say is that it's going to be unique to every single community, and it's going to be related to the values that community has and the needs that those community has. So I know that Arvada, through the original CARES Act dollars, had many programs that provided originally loans, but then we converted them all to grants through that. That would kind of help businesses in general. But as we look at this next round of funding, we really are trying to get targeted and understand what the specific needs are. So restaurant workers getting back, I know that that's been a topic of conversation. Where we land on that, I'm not exactly sure. I know that the Colorado Restaurant Association, their president just put out a letter to all the mayors asking for very specific ways of using those funds. So I know that those are being considered by different communities, which is important and certainly will be considered. But it's also going to be balancing other priority needs. So it would be hard to make a generic statement of how those funds are going to be used. But I know that supporting businesses, including restaurants and other retail businesses, are eligible for the funds. And then I think advocacy with your community leaders about what's needed in your community versus other priorities is where that conversation is mostly going to be had.
And Julie, if I can add to it, I can tell you ICSC is working on what it's called the Small Business Comeback Incentive, which is designed for small retailers. PPP was really designed to help those people, those companies that had a large amount of employees, and those small companies didn't really benefit from that. So think of the shoe cobbler or the dry cleaner or whatever. They're now looking for a sponsor for a bill for relief on that. Called the Small Business Comeback Incentive.
That's great information. Thank you very much.
Again, I want to thank today's session by thanking our panelists today for sharing their perspective, industry knowledge, and insight. If you want to connect with our speakers afterwards, please connect with me, and I will get you all connected. And a big thank you to our dedicated events and programming committee and the communications committee who all helped bring this series to fruition. Please keep your eyes open for more information on our next series in July. And if you have any ideas that you would like us to explore, we're always looking for those ideas. I also wanted to re-mention that our both of these committees really helped, as well as our contributors today, really helped us put together a thought position report, which really dives in with a lot of the data that we talked about, a lot of the information that we talked about today, that we will be providing to all of our members. And for those of you that are non-members, we do have a nominal fee for that, but we do hope that you find ways that you can connect with us and become part of our network. As I said in the chat section, never more have we ever seen the type of collaboration we have seen in the last year, and it's that kind of collaboration that actually moves mountains. So we will be providing all this information to you all in a link that we'll send to you in an email. Most likely it will be like on Friday. We do have to fix up the video now, so it will take a little bit longer to get that out to you. But we're hoping that the thought position paper will then be something that you guys can utilize at the local level and start those discussions. Again, you can find all of our information at edcconline.org events calendar. This is our events for this year, and we will be posting all of the resources, the videos and thought position papers in each one of these pods that you see on the screen. Don't forget our basic economic development course, which is a fundamental on economic development. So if there's anyone that wanted to really get to know economic development and the realities of it, please register. Time is running short on that. And you can find all of our resources and tools at edcconline.org. We appreciate you all. Thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you back here in July.